Margaret Hayes had taught second grade for nearly 15 years, and in all that time, she'd learned to read the silent language of children. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, as the yellow buses pulled away and the hallways grew quiet, she noticed little Emma Thornton sitting alone at her desk, tears streaming down her pink cheeks. Margaret was a woman in her early 30s with gentle features and kind blue eyes that seemed to understand more than words could say. Her honey blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple cream-colored dress with delicate puffed sleeves. There was something timeless about her appearance, a warmth that made children feel safe. "Emma, sweetheart," Margaret said softly, kneeling beside the small desk. "What's troubling you?" The little girl, no more than 7 years old, wore a pink dress dotted with tiny flowers. Her light brown hair was pulled back, but a few strands had escaped during the day's activities. She clutched a crayon in her small hand, her artwork forgotten. "I don't have anyone to walk me home," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Daddy's always late now. He tries so hard, but he's always working." Margaret felt her heart squeeze. She'd noticed the changes in Emma over the past 6 months. The little girl who once arrived each morning with braided hair and a bright smile now often came with wrinkled clothes and sadness in her eyes. "Tell you what," Margaret said gently. "Why don't you help me tidy up the classroom? We can talk. And when your father arrives, everything will be just right." Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Together, they straightened books and gathered stray pencils. Margaret didn't rush the child. She simply let her talk, and slowly the story emerged. Emma's mother had passed away the previous winter. The little girl spoke of her in soft, reverent tones, the way children do when they're trying to hold on to something precious that's slipping away. Her father, she explained, was trying his very best, but he seemed lost too. "He forgets things now," Emma said, arranging crayons by color. "Like that I don't like bananas in my lunch. Mommy always remembered. And sometimes he looks so tired that I don't want to bother him." Margaret understood then. This wasn't just about a late pickup. This was about a family trying to find its way through grief, each member struggling alone. Nearly an hour passed before they heard footsteps in the hallway. Margaret looked up to see a man in a dark charcoal suit standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his dark hair slightly disheveled. He was perhaps in his late 30s, with the kind of refined appearance that spoke of business meetings and important decisions. But his eyes held a weariness that went deeper than simple fatigue. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion. "The meeting ran late and traffic was impossible." "Emma, sweetheart, I tried to get here sooner." The little girl ran to him and he scooped her up, holding her close. Margaret watched the tender way he pressed his face against his daughter's hair, the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly when she was in his arms. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Margaret Hayes, Emma's teacher," she said, extending her hand. "Please don't apologize. Emma and I had a lovely time together." Robert Thornton shook her hand, and Margaret could feel the tension in his grip. This was a man carrying too much, she thought. A man trying to be everything to everyone and succeeding at none of it. "Would you have a moment to talk?" Margaret asked gently. "Perhaps Emma could draw us a picture at that table over there?" Robert glanced at his watch, then at his daughter's hopeful face and nodded. They settled into the small chairs meant for 7-year-olds, their knees nearly touching their chins. Under different circumstances, it might have been comical. "Mr. Thornton," Margaret began carefully, "Emma is a wonderful child. Bright, kind, creative. But I've noticed she's been struggling lately." Robert's face tightened. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm failing her. I'm trying to be both parents, but I'm not doing either job well. I run a company. I have responsibilities, but none of them matter as much as Emma. Yet somehow, she's the one I keep letting down." There was no defensiveness in his voice, only honest pain. Margaret recognized it as the sound of a man who'd been strong for too long without anyone to lean on himself. "You're not failing," Margaret said firmly but kindly. "You're grieving and parenting and working all at once. That's not failing. That's surviving. But Emma needs to know she can talk to you. She's holding back because she thinks you have too much to carry already." Robert looked at his daughter across the room, her tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on her drawing. Her mother was the heart of our home, he said softly. Victoria knew how to do all of this. She made it look easy. I'm just stumbling in the dark. No one makes it look easy, Margaret assured him. They just hide the stumbling better. Listen, I know this might sound forward, but what if I helped? Just small things. Emma could stay after school on the days you can't make it on time. We could work on reading together, or I could help her with projects. Not as charity, but because I care about my students. Robert met her eyes, and Margaret saw something shift there. Perhaps it was relief, or maybe just the recognition that he didn't have to do this alone. I couldn't ask you to do that, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're not asking. I'm offering. Over the following weeks, a quiet routine developed. On the days Robert's meetings ran late, Emma would stay with Margaret. They'd read stories, practice writing, or sometimes just talk. Margaret learned that Emma loved butterflies and was afraid of thunderstorms. She discovered that the little girl had her mother's love of music and her father's stubborn determination. Robert began arriving earlier when he could, sometimes bringing coffee for Margaret as a thank you. They'd talk while Emma played, conversations that started about schedules and homework, but gradually deepened into something more personal. Margaret learned that Robert hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost his best friend, his partner, the person who balanced him. He ran Thornton Industries, a technology company his grandfather had founded, but the weight of that legacy felt hollow without Victoria to share it with. She used to tell me when I was being too serious, Robert said one afternoon, a sad smile on his face. She'd remind me that success meant nothing if we weren't happy. I forgot that for a while. I buried myself in work because it was easier than facing the empty house. Margaret listened, not offering easy platitudes or false comfort. Sometimes, she'd learned, people just needed someone to witness their pain. One evening in late spring, Emma asked if Miss Hayes could come to dinner. Robert hesitated, then surprised himself by agreeing. Margaret arrived at their home, a beautiful but somehow lonely house on the edge of town, carrying a homemade apple pie. My grandmother's recipe, she explained, setting it on the counter. She always said the best conversations happen over warm pie. They ate together at the kitchen table, Emma chattering about her day, Robert occasionally catching Margaret's eye with a grateful smile. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything more than 3 people sharing a meal. But it was the first time in months that the house felt like a home. After Emma went to bed, Robert and Margaret sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. I need to tell you something, Robert said quietly. I haven't been entirely honest with you. Margaret turned to him, concern crossing her face. When I told you I run a company, I didn't mention that Thornton Industries is one of the largest tech firms in the state. I'm not just a manager, Margaret. I'm the CEO. The media follows me. People know my name. I didn't tell you because, for the first time since Victoria died, someone was treating me like a normal person, just a struggling father who needed help. And that felt like breathing after being underwater. Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing. Does this change anything? She finally asked. I hope not, Robert said. Because these past few weeks, watching you with Emma, seeing my daughter smile again, having someone to talk to who doesn't want anything from me, it's reminded me what matters. You showed us both kindness without knowing who I was. That's rare. You're just Robert, Margaret said simply. Emma's father? That's who you are to me. Summer came, and with it, a shift in their relationship. It wasn't rushed or dramatic. It unfolded naturally, like flowers blooming in their proper season. Robert made time to leave work earlier. He showed up for school events. He learned to braid Emma's hair, even if it took him 3 tries to get it right. Margaret never asked for anything, but Robert found himself wanting to give. Not money or expensive gifts, but time and attention and the pieces of himself he'd locked away after Victoria's death. One Saturday morning, Robert invited Margaret to the park where Emma's class was having a picnic. As they watched Emma play with her friends, her laughter carried on the breeze, Robert took Margaret's hand. Thank you, he said, for seeing us, for caring when you didn't have to. Margaret squeezed his hand gently. Sometimes the greatest things we do are the simplest. We show up, we care, we offer what we can. They stood there together, watching Emma chase butterflies through the grass, her pink dress flowing behind her. In that moment, they were just three people who'd found each other in the midst of loss and loneliness. The sun was warm on their faces, and for the first time in a long time, Robert could imagine tomorrow without dreading it. Not because the pain was gone, but because he'd learned he didn't have to face it alone. Margaret had taught him that. Not through grand gestures or profound speeches, but through quiet, consistent kindness. By staying after school, by listening, by remembering that behind titles and responsibilities are simply human hearts that need connection. As Emma ran back to show them a four-leaf clover she'd found, her face bright with joy, Robert realized that sometimes the people who change our lives arrive quietly, without fanfare. They show up in ordinary moments and offer what they can, and sometimes that's everything.